Hello again, and welcome to vintage story time. I can't remember if I called it story time or read along or something along those lines, but welcome to That Right Woman's vintage story time. Several things have changed about the layout, and several things about the setup have changed, as you can see. So I did my very first fundraising for the new setup stream, and as you can see, we raised some money that I'm very thankful for. Thank you very much to anyone who's watching this who contributed to that. The setup, I brought the camera closer to the book. I'll bring it up slightly more like that, because I noticed last time you couldn't really see the letters. When I had the book open, you couldn't really read along. And I hope this time you'll be able to at least see a little bit of it. It is quite a small font, so there's not a huge amount I can do. But because it's a royalty-free book, if you wanted to get the text version from anywhere on the internet, you absolutely can to read along. The other thing is I've moved the camera closer to my face. And the reason I've done that is because there was a problem with the audio. You could probably hear it in the very last one. But there's a problem with the audio that it kept cutting me off at the end of sentences and at the end of words. And that was because I had a filter on. So I've taken that filter off, but because that filter's now off, I've got to bring the microphone closer to my face. Hopefully it doesn't peak. We'll find out. I'm figuring out this process slowly but surely. And without further ado, I think we'll get along with our chapter 2 of the Three Musketeers. Antechamber of M. de Treville. M. de Troisville, as his family was called in Gascony, or M. de Treville, as he called himself in Paris, had actually begun life like D'Artagnan, that is to say, without being born a sou, but with that fund of audacity, esprit, and resolution, which makes the poorest of Gascon gentlemen often inherit more in imagination than the richest nobleman of Perigord or Berry receives in reality. His daring and haughty courage, still more haughty in success at the time, when blows fell thick as hail, had raised him to the top of that difficult ladder which is called court favour, and which he had climbed 4 rungs at a time. He was the confidential friend of the king, who, as everyone knows, greatly honoured the memory of his father, Henry IV. The father of M. de Treville had served the latter so faithfully in the wars against the League, that for want of ready money, a commodity which during his life was very scarce with the Bernese, who constantly paid his debts, with what he never had occasion to borrow, that is to say, with his genius, for want of ready money, as we have said, he had authorised him after the reduction of Paris to take for his arms un lion de puissant surgeles, with the motto Fidelis et fortis. It was a great deal of honour, but not much profit. Therefore, when the illustrious companion of Henry the Great died, the sole inheritance he left his son was his sword with the arms and motto. Thanks, however, to his double legacy, and to the name without tarnish which accompanied it, M. de Treville was admitted into the household of the young prince, where he made such good use of the sword, and was so true to his motto, that King Louis XIII, one of the best hands with the rapier in his own kingdom, used to say that if he had a friend who was going to fight, he would advise him to take for a second first himself and then Treville, or perhaps Treville before himself. On this account, Louis had a real affection for Treville, a royal affection, an egotistical affection, it must be allowed, but an affection nevertheless. In those unhappy days, it was an important consideration to surround oneself with men of Treville's stamp. Many could take for their service the epaulet of Fortis, which formed the second part of the motto, but very few men could claim the epithet Fidelis, which informed the first part of it. Treville was one of the few. His was one of the rare organisations with the intelligence and obedience of the mastiff, and a blind courage, and a ready hand, one to whom the eye had been given only to see whether the king was dissatisfied with anyone, and the hand only to strike the offending person. A besom, a morevers, a pollard de mer, a vitry. In short, Treville only wanted an opportunity, but he watched for it, and was resolved to seize it by its 3 hairs if it ever came within reach of his grasp. Louis XIII therefore appointed Treville captain of the Musketeers, who, by their devotion, or rather fanaticism, became what his ordinary troops were to Henry III, and his Scottish Guard to Louis XI. In this respect, the cardinal was not behind the king, for when he saw the formidable picked guard with which Louis surrounded himself, this second, or rather this first king of France, wished also to have his own guard, and therefore, as well as the king, had his musketeers. And these two potent rivals were seen selecting for their service, all from the provinces of France, and even from the foreign countries, men famous for their skill as swordsmen. It was not rare for Richelieu and the king, over the game of chess in the evening, to dispute concerning the merits of their respective followers. Each boasted of the deportment and courage of his own, and whilst openly envying against duels and imbroglios, they secretly excited their respective partisans to fight, and experienced immoderate delight, or intense chagrin at their respective victories or defeats. Thus at least says the memoir of one who was concerned in some of these defeats and many of these victories. Treville had seized on the weak point in his master's character, and to this knowledge he owed the long and consistent favour of a king who was not left behind him the reputation of having been consistent in his friendships. He paraded his musketeers before the cardinal, armband Duplessis, with an air of insolence which made the grey moustache of his eminence curl with anger. Treville also thoroughly understood the war of that period, when, if you lived not at the expense of the enemy, you lived at that of your countrymen. His soldiers formed a legion of very devils, under no discipline but his own. Swaggering bullies given to wine, the king's musketeers, or rather M. de Trevilles, spread themselves through the taverns, the public walks, and the theatres, talking loud, curling their moustaches, jingling their swords, hustling the guards of the cardinal when they met them, indulging in the open street in 1,000 jokes, sometimes killed, but then certain of being lamented and avenged, sometimes killing, but then quite certain not to languish in prison, since M. de Treville was always at hand to procure their pardon and release. Therefore M. de Treville was lauded in every tone, sung of in every key, by these men who adored him. Yet hang-dogs as they were, they trembled before him as scholars before their master, obedient to a word, and ready to meet death to wipe away any reproach. M. de Treville had used this powerful lever first for the king and his friends, and next for himself and his own friends. The captain of the musketeers was therefore admired, feared, and loved, which state constitutes the apogee of human affairs. Louis XIV absorbed all the lesser stars of his court by his vast brilliancy, but his father, sol pluribus impar, imparted his personal splendour to the many of his favourites, his favourite individual valour to each of his courtiers. Beside the king's levy, and that of the cardinal, there were then at Paris at least 200 smaller ones, fairly exclusive, and amongst these 200 smaller levies, that of M. de Treville was one of the most frequented. From 6 o'clock in the morning during summer and 8 in the winter, the courtyard of his hotel in the Rue de Vaux-Colombier resembled a camp. From 50 to 60 musketeers, who appeared to relieve each other, and to present a number always imposing, were stalking about incessantly, armed to the teeth, and ready for anything. From one end to the other of one of the long staircases, on whose space our modern civilization would build an entire mansion, ascended and descended those petitioners who sought favours, with provincial gentlemen eager to be involved, and liveried lackeys of every colour, in the act of delivering messages from their masters. M. de Treville. In the antechamber on circular benches reclined the elite, that is, such of them as had assembled. A continual buzzing prevailed from morning till night, whilst M. de Treville and his cabinet, adjoining the antechamber, received visits, listened to complaints, gave his orders, and like the king in the balcony at the Louvre, had only to place himself at his window to review his men and their arms. On the day when D'Artagnan presented himself, the assembly was very imposing, especially to a provincial just arrived in Paris. It is true this provincial was Gascon, And at this period, more especially, D'Artagnan's countrymen had the reputation of not being easily intimidated. In fact, as soon as anyone had passed the threshold of the massive door studded with long square nails, he found himself in the midst of a troop of swordsmen who were cruising about the court, talking, quarrelling, and jesting with each other. To clear a path through these eddies, it was necessary to be an officer, a man of rank, or a pretty woman. It was therefore in the midst of this crowd and disorder that our youth, holding his long rapier against his slender legs, and the rim of his beaver in his hand, advanced with a palpitating heart, yet with that sort of half-smile of provincial embarrassment which wishes to create a good impression. When he had passed one group, he breathed more freely. But when he perceived that they turned to look at him and D'Artagnan, who to that day had invariably entertained a pretty good opinion of himself, for the first time in his life thought himself ridiculous. When he had reached the staircase, it was still worse. On the first step were 4 musketeers, who amused themselves in the following manner. Whilst 10 or dozen of their companions waited on the landing till it was their turn to have a share in the game. One of them, on a higher step, with a naked sword in his hand, prevented or endeavoured to prevent the other 3 from mounting the stairs. While these 3 skirmished with him very actively with their swords, D'Artagnan at first took these swords for foils and thought they were buttoned, but he soon found by certain scratches that each weapon was sharp as possible. And at each of these scratches, not only the spectators but the actors themselves laughed most heartily. The one who held the higher step at the time kept his opponents at bay with a dexterous manner. A circle was formed around him, the condition of the game being that at every bit he who was struck should relinquish the pastime and surrender his turn of reception by M. de Treville to the one who had touched him. In 5 minutes 3 were grazed, one on the hand, one on the chin, and the other on the ear, by this defender of the staircase, who was himself untouched, a proof of his skill which, according to the rules of the game, entitled him to 3 turns of favour. This sport surprised our young traveller, although he did not wish it to appear that he was astonished. He had seen in his own province, that province where, moreover, the fiery passions are so promptly roused, a good many provocatives to duels, and yet the gasconade of these 4 players appeared much stronger than any he had heard of even in Gascony. He fancied he was transported to that famous country of giants where Gulliver afterwards went, and was so frightened. And yet he had not reached the end. The landing place and antechamber still remained. On the landing place they did not fight, but recounted histories of the fair sex, and in the antechamber tales of the court. On the landing place D'Artagnan blushed, in the antechamber he shuddered. But if his good manners were shocked on the landing place, his respect for the cardinal was scandalised in the antechamber. There, to his great astonishment, he heard the policy which made all Europe tremble openly criticised, as well as the private life of the cardinal, which so many powerful men had been punished for attempting to scrutinise. That great man whom D'Artagnan's father had so deeply reverenced, M. de Treville and his men made their butt deriding on his bandy legs and crooked back. Some sang carols on Madame de Anglion, his mistress, and Madame du Combalet, his niece, whilst others planned adventures against the pages and guards of the Cardinal Duke himself. All these things appeared to D'Artagnan monstrous impossibilities. Nevertheless, when the name of the king accidentally slipped out in the midst of these jokes on the cardinal, a sort of momentary gag stopped all their jeering mouths, and they looked around with hesitation, and seemed to doubt the discretion of the wall of M. de Treville's cabinet. But some allusion soon brought back the conversation to his eminence. The wit was of the most brilliant kind, and none of his actions was uncommented upon. Verily, thought D'Artagnan with terror, these gentry will soon be put into the Bastille and hanged. Doubtless I shall accompany them, for having heard all they have said, I shall, without doubt, be taken for an accomplice. What would my father say, he who enjoined me so strongly to respect the cardinal, if he knew that I was in the company of such reprobates? Of course, while D'Artagnan dared not join in the conversation, he kept his eyes and ears wide open, in every sense on the alert. that he might lose nothing, and in spite of the paternal advice, he found himself drawn by his tastes and instinct rather to praise than blame the incredible things he had heard about him. Nevertheless, as he was absolutely a stranger to the crowd, one of M. de Treville's courtiers, and it was the first time he had been seen there, someone came to inquire what he wanted. At this question, he humbly gave his name, relying on his being a countryman, and requested the servant to solicit a moment's audience of M. de Treville, a request which the inquirer, in the tone of protector, promised to make at the proper time. D'Artagnan, a little recovered from his first surprise, had now the time to study the dresses and countenances of those around him. In the midst of the most animated group was a musketeer of great height, of haughty countenance, and so fantastical a costume as to attract general attention. He did not wear his uniform tunic, which was not absolutely indispensable at that period of less liberty, yet greater independence, but a closed coat of celestial blue, slightly faded and worn, and on his coat a magnificent border of gold embroidery, which glittered like scales upon a sunlit stream. A long mantle or cloak of crimson velvet hung gracefully from his shoulders, covering the front alone of his splendid belt, from which depended his enormous rapier. This musketeer, who had just come from guard, complained of having caught cold, and coughed occasionally with great affectation. Therefore, as he averred, he had taken his cloak, and while he was talking loudly over the group and proudly curling his moustache, every one which admired the embroidered belt, and D'Artagnan more than anyone else. "What would you have?" asked the musketeer. "It is the fashion. I know very well that it is foolish, but it is the fashion. Besides, one must spend one's hereditary property on something or other." "Ah, Porthos," cried one of the bystanders, "do not try to make us believe that this lace comes from the paternal generosity. It was given to you by the veiled lady with whom I met you the other Sunday near the gate of Saint Honore. No, upon my honour and this faith of a gentleman, I bought it with my own money," said he whom they called Porthos. "Yes, as I bought this new purse with what my mistress put in the old," cried another musketeer. "But it is true," said Porthos, "and the proof is that I paid 12 pistoles for it." The wonder and admiration were redoubled, though the doubt still existed. "Is it not so, Aramis?" inquired Porthos, turning to another musketeer. The person thus appealed to formed a perfect contrast to the one who thus questioned him, and who designated him by the name of Aramis. He was a young man, not more than 22 or 23 years of age, with a soft and ingenuous countenance, a black and mild eye, and cheeks rosy and damask as an autumnal peach. His slender moustache marked a perfect straight line along his upper lip, and his hands appeared to dread hanging down, for fear of making their veins swell, and he was continuously pinching the tips of his ears to make them preserve a delicate and transparent carnation hue. Habitually, he talked little and slowly, often bowed, laughed quietly, merely showing his teeth, which were good, and as of the rest of his person, he appeared to take the greatest care. He replied to his friend's question by affirmative inclination of the head. This affirmation appeared to settle all doubt concerning the embroidery. They therefore continued to admire it, and said no more about it, and by a sudden change of thought the conversation once passed to another subject. "What do you think of this story of Chalet's squire?" inquired another musketeer, not addressing anyone in particular, but the company in general. "And what does he say?" demanded Porthos in a conceited tone. "He said that he found Rochefort, the tool of the cardinal, at Brussels, disguised as a Capuchin friar, and that this cursed Rochefort, thanks to his disguise, had deceived M. de Longny, simpleton as he is." "He is a simpleton," said Porthos, "but is it a fact?" "I heard it from Aramis," answered the musketeer. "Really?" "Ah, you know it well enough, Porthos," said Aramis. "I told it you myself yesterday evening. Do not let us talk any more about it." Not talk more about it. That is your view on the matter, said Porthos. Not talk any more about it. Egad, you would make a short work of it. What, the cardinal sets a spy upon a gentleman, robs him of his correspondence through a traitor, a robber, a gallows bird, cut Chalet's throat through this spy, and by means of correspondence under this flimsy pretext that he desired to kill the king and marry Monseigneur to the queen? No one knew one word of this enigma. No one told us of it yesterday evening, to the great astonishment of everyone. And whilst we are still all amazed about the news, you come today and say to us, let us talk no more about it. Well, then, since it better suits your armour, let us talk about it, calmly replied Aramis. Were I poor Chalet's squire, cried Porthos, this Rochefort would pass a bad minute with me, and the Red Duke would make but a short work of you. And the Red Duke would make but short work with you, replied Aramis. Ah, the Red Duke! Bravo, bravo! The Red Duke! Exclaimed Porthos with an approving nod, clapping his hands. The Red Duke is charming. Rest assured, my dear fellow, that I will disseminate the title. What a genius he has, this Aramis. What a pity that you could not follow your vocation, my dear fellow. What an exquisite abe you would have made. Oh, it is a mere transitionary delay, replied Aramis. One day or other I shall be one, for you well know, Porthos, that I continue to study theology with that intention. He will actually do as he says, replied Porthos. He will do it, sooner or later. Very soon, said Aramis. He only waits for one thing to decide what he will do, and to resume his cassock which he hung up behind his uniform, replied another musketeer. And what event does he wait for? Inquired another. He waits till the Queen has given an heir to the crown of France. Let us not jest on this subject, gentlemen, said Porthos. Thank God the Queen is yet of age to give it one. And it is said that the Duke of Buckingham is in France, observed Aramis with a mocking laugh, which gave to his remark, simple as it was in appearance, a meaning sufficiently scandalous. Aramis, my friend, this time you are wrong, rejoined Porthos, and your wit leads you too far. It would be worse for you if M. de Treville heard you talking in this manner. Do not lecture me, Porthos, cried Aramis, in whose soft eyes something like the lightning's flash now passed. My dear fellow, be either musketeer or abe. Be one or the other, but not one and the other, exclaimed Porthos. You may remember that Athos told you the other day that you eat at every rack, but let us not dispute, I beseech you. It would be perfectly useless. You know which is settled between you and me and Athos. You go to Madame de Anglion's and you pay her attentions, then you repair to Madame du Bois-Tracy, the cousin of Madame du Chevreuse, and a woman whose good graces you are thought to stand highly. Nay, my dear fellow, confess not to your good fortune, but no one demands your secret. Every one knows your discretion, and since you possess this virtue yourself, surely you will not grudge some portion of it to the Queen. Let who will talk about the King and the Cardinal, but the Queen is sacred, and if you discuss her after all, let it be respectfully. Porthos, you are presumptuous as Narcissus, said Aramis. You know that I detest moralizing, except from Athos. As to you, my dear fellow, you have rather too splendid a belt to be powerful on that subject. I will be an abbé, suits me. In the meantime, I am a musketeer, in which character I say, and what I choose at this moment, I choose to tell you that you irritate me. Aramis! Porthos! That will do, gentlemen, gentlemen! Cried out all around them. M. de Treville awaits M. de D'Artagnan, interrupted the lackey, opening the door of the cabinet. At this declaration, during which the door remained open, everyone was silent, and in the midst of his general silence the young Gascon, passing through the part of the antechamber, entered the cabinet of the captain of the Musketeers, felicitating himself with all the heart upon escaping the conclusion of this singular quarrel. Oh my goodness, this section was hard to read. Okay, so we've met Porthos, we met Aramis. I've not figured out their voices yet. I'm trying to get better at reading with voices. I think I'm putting Porthos in the front of the mouth, where I'm bringing my lips out and I'm saying, this is how he would speak, with a little bit, I'm posh, I'm grand, I'm superior, this is who I am. Aramis I haven't placed yet. It said that he talked slow, so when I first started speaking, I was talking slow, but then he got cheeky, which I think would speak a little faster. So I think I'll try and put Aramis. I've put Athos up in the top. I put Athos with a bit of a bark and a bit of an up to say, hello, sir, this is who I am, blah, blah, blah. So maybe I'll put Aramis in closer to my own voice, where he's a bit more like, he still has that posh affectation, but he'll be a bit more like upwards. Though I was kind of saving that voice for D'Artagnan, because I want D'Artagnan to be close to my voice because he is the main character. I don't know. I need to get better at voices for sure. Because they're men's voices, I need to make sure not to lower my voice because that's going to tire my voice out. So we'll see what happens. But we met... He's in to see M. de Treville. We met the other two of the three Musketeers. And we got a glimpse into the Musketeers' life. It's very... as I expected it to be. It's very swashbuckling, very masculine, classically masculine, very sexist, and everything that you would expect it to be. I'm really enjoying this book. I am mispronouncing a lot of things. With an abba, is it an abe, an abba, an abbe? I think that he means a monk, correct? Let me know in the comments, because I don't know this stuff. That'll be it for this episode. As you know, I'm doing these read-throughs to raise some funds, if possible, for my new streaming setup, as I am a streamer, I'm a writer, I'm a streamer, I'm a video maker now. So that is the purpose of these. If you can give anything would be welcome. If you can't, just keep watching the videos. That would be great. And subscribing would be brilliant, because you have to be over a threshold of 1,000 subscribers to earn anything from YouTube videos. So that would be a wonderful addition indeed. Again, sorry for mispronunciations. Sorry for things that I don't notice that aren't acceptable anymore. I noticed that some comments from Aramis to do with the underage queen getting pregnant. I did notice those as being inappropriate, so I apologize for those, but I'm reading the book simply as it is written, unless I come across something that is abhorrent, and that will need to be cut. I hope you all have a good day, and I will see you in the next chapter. Bye, everyone. It was not rare for Richelieu. I should make a compilation for the end of these of me mispronouncing names, because I cut quite a few of them. Is it an abba? Abbe? An abbe if it is enormous rapier. I mean, that's got to be an innuendo for something, right? Right, I need to stop being immature. This is a classic book.